I think by and large, the majority of people who haven't achieved success, it's typically not because of their creativity or because of their technical skills. It's very rare that the quality of their work is the problem. I think people who really want to be successful in this industry, they have to spend a great deal of time on the business side. You absolutely cannot neglect the business side of things because things won't just magically pan out for you.
Let me just reverse the question. What skill really don't matter today that used to be considered as essential?
I would say to a certain degree, I think trying to pick out maybe gear selection, if you will. So I think 10 years ago, there was still input. I think 10 years ago, I think there's an argument to be made where there was a certain amount of due diligence and research that you needed to do. The ability to provide value, create value, and to, you could call it sell more of your services, doesn't stop and shouldn't stop just on that initial meeting. I know so many filmmakers we talk to, they kind of view it as this very hard line in the sand where the fact that you're capturing all of this incredible content, a lot of that can be an opportunity to sell content later. And I would say thirdly, I know it sounds really trivial, but ask for the upsell.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So today we have Michael Gustamacchio, the CEO of Mediazilla, and he will share with us that if he start as a filmmaker today, what he gonna consider, what are the things really matters, and what are the things that really worked before, like 5-10 years before, and that really doesn't matter today, and what are the things any filmmaker who wanna start today really need to consider. So without any further delay, Michael, welcome to today's show. So if you would like to take 1 minute to really introduce yourself, you're open.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it. Yeah, hey everyone, great to be here. My name is Michael Gustamacchio. I'm one of the co-founders of Mediazilla, along with our co-founder John Geddes. I'm also the CEO. So yeah, really excited to be here. Inzamam and I have been having some great discussions about some key topics that really impact event filmmakers, wedding filmmakers, and we're really hopeful that this provides some real value. Whether or not you use Mediazilla, obviously we do, that's great, but if not, we really want to try to provide real value to people in the industry that can really help them become the best version of themselves and really become as successful as they want to be.
Awesome. So, Michael, so the first question, like as all other filmmakers, what would be the first 3 things that you will consider if you really start filmmaking today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, there's probably 100 things to consider, but yeah, if we kind of distill it down to maybe the top 3 or 3 most important, I really think the first thing that people should consider is why are they even going into filmmaking to begin with? I think you could call it a philosophical question. You could call it something that maybe you want to meditate on and spend some time, but I think it's really important to answer this question. And the reason I say this is because we've worked with tens of thousands of filmmakers over the last, call it 15 years or so, 16 years. And we've seen a few common themes that really emerge, especially for how people become event filmmakers, and especially into wedding filmmakers. And a few of the themes that we see, one is that people start as a hobby. And, maybe you guys, probably a lot of you guys watching this can identify where a friend or family member or coworker said, hey, you have a camera, right? Can you come film my wedding? Or, hey, I think I remember you telling me you were into filmmaking or you went to film school. Would you mind filming my wedding? And maybe you did it for free, maybe you did it for a little amount of money, but you did it as something that was exciting and probably scary at the same time. And, you learned a lot from it. And a lot of people start that way. And they started as a hobby and kind of a side gig, side business. And then at some point, they decide to either go full-time or they decide to go pro, if you will, become a professional. Doesn't have to be full-time, but they consider themselves a professional, meaning they're charging accordingly for their services. They're invested in continue to improve themselves, and they want to put out the best quality product. So there's a very clear distinction between a professional and an amateur, or a professional and a hobbyist. So that's kind of one way that people might get in the industry. So bring this back, kind of this first point is understanding, well, why are you even becoming a filmmaker? Why is this important, especially a wedding filmmaker? Because look, you probably hopefully you've talked to enough people in the industry, which maybe that's the second point, but talk to people who are already in the industry. And this is true of any profession. My sister, for example, she's a veterinarian. Before she became a veterinarian, she went and talked to other people who were actually veterinarians. Not people in vet school, not people thinking about wanting to go into the profession, but like people actually in the profession, 5 years in, 10 years in, 20 years in, and try to extract some wisdom. from those folks. I think that's super, super important. And it's no different than anyone who's a wedding filmmaker or someone who wants to be an event filmmaker. Talk to someone already in the industry and talk to as many people as you can and just get some real world insights, not theoretical, not just what's on Facebook or Instagram and people are only posting the great stuff, but get a full picture of what it means. So I think that's super important. The second part is really going back to this original point is, why are you becoming a filmmaker to begin with? Why is this so important? Why do you want to dedicate a certain huge part of your life and your effort and your talents? And there's massive opportunity costs. So really answering that question. And there's no right or wrong answer, but I think it's an important question that every filmmaker should answer for themselves and have a very clear, definitive North Star, if you will. Maybe it's you want to make a living doing something in the creative arts. Maybe you really, really love weddings specifically and the storytelling behind it and everything that kind of comes with that. There could be a variety of reasons, but I think you need to have a really, really solid foundation. And the reason I bring this up is because it's a challenging industry. It's not a walk in the park, and there's no guarantee that you're going to make boatloads of money. Quite the contrary. Now, you can be incredibly successful. There's plenty of success stories, but if you talk to every single one of those people, without question, they all had to work incredibly hard and be very diligent and very deliberate on getting to a very high level of success. It just didn't happen by accident. It just didn't fall into success, or it happened by accident. So I would say that's something that's really, really important. And then I would say the third part of it is, and this can evolve, this third part I would say can evolve, but understanding what type of films do you want to put out, or what do you want your brand to be, or how do you want to be perceived in the market? And it's okay to pick different lanes, if you will, and it's okay to change over time. But what we found, and again, this is kind of going back to the intentionality part of it, but what we found is that a lot of people, and I get it early on, you kind of pick up any gig that you can get. Okay, hey, this one paid $500. Okay, this one paid $1,500. Okay, this couple didn't have a ton of money, so I cut them a deal, or I did this at a cut rate to get my portfolio built. And none of those are bad. All those things are important. Just getting more experience is outstanding. But I think you should have a clear path that you want to follow. And I'll just break down a couple examples that we've seen with filmmakers throughout, say, call it the last 15, 16 years. So one is people who they end up being kind of a high volume and a much larger organization where they might have 10, 15, 20 employees. They have a set of shooters. They have a set of editors. They have people who handle marketing and sales and customer support. They have a very, very defined process, a very repeatable business, and they're doing things at scale, meaning they're doing 500, 1,000. We have some members doing 2,000 weddings a year. So obviously at that scale, you're not going to be doing it by yourself. You're going to have a whole team of people, and a lot of times you're going to be overseeing a team. You're probably not going to be filming a ton of weddings anymore, doing a lot of edits. You're going to be very much kind of hands off and having people do it. So that's kind of one path, and that could be one path you want to go down. A second path is people who are doing, let's go to kind of one extreme as well, is the ultra high-end premium. So if you think about people like Ray Roman, like Lindsay Conklin, like other folks that are doing, the top weddings, getting paid anywhere from $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 plus per gig, typically doing lower volume. So maybe doing 20 weddings a year, give or take, but the profit is much, much higher. And there's a number of ways to be successful. Some of them is building this personal brand. Some of it you can still build a name. So, for example, Lindsay Conklin, he has Lurie Films, so that's kind of one option. But I think, to answer your question, this third point is kind of figure out what path that you want to go down. Because what we've seen on the opposite is that people oftentimes, they wonder after a year, 2 years, 3 years, why am I not more successful? Why can't I raise my prices? And a lot of the problems is because they're taking, even after 2 or 3 years, they're not defining who they are in the marketplace. They're not defining their ideal customer profile, and they're not defining what type of jobs that they want to work on or don't want to work on. And so a lot of times they end up just taking anything that comes in. Okay, hey, this client came in, they only had a $1,200 budget, even though I've been doing this for 3 years, and I can't make any money. I can't have a second shooter on here. I can't outsource any editing, so I'll just do it myself. And they just do it to kind of bring in some revenue in the short term. So, yeah, I would say there's way more things, and obviously, you should. The other part, maybe the fourth part, is seek advice from a lot of people in the industry, especially folks that are successful, and really understand, what are the things that they put a lot of value in, and what helped them help them be successful. But I would ask them, what are the things that they avoided, or lessons that they learned, or mistakes that they made, and they can share that wisdom with you. Because I think maybe that's the fourth point, if you will. But if you can going back to talking to people in the industry, getting that advice and input from folks can really help you ideally avoid some landmines and shorten your learning curve. Or there's a great phrase by, I don't know if you guys know, but he's really big into marketing, Alex Hormozy. He calls it paying down your ignorance debt. And it's, this is a real thing that exists in any industry you go into, any profession. So the faster you can pay down that ignorance debt, the faster that you can start moving forward and really making progress. So.
Okay, great. And if I just ask, what are the one mistake you think new filmmakers don't realize they are making unless it hurts their business?
It's a great question. Yeah, there's probably more than one, but we could focus kind of on one thing. So I would say, I think I've thought a lot about this question, and there's probably a number of ways of answering it. But I would say the big thing is, to provide context, most filmmakers that we've seen, let's say if we look at maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the line of why they are or are not successful, I think by and large, the majority of people who haven't achieved success, it's typically not because of their creativity or because of their technical skills or because of their ability to film and tell beautiful stories. I would say it's actually quite rare that you have someone who, after 2-3 years, especially if they went to film school or they practice a lot and they really put in the time, that the quality of their work isn't is what's actually holding them back. It's very rare that the quality of their work is the problem. Generally what we've seen is that because, again, we're creatives and we're really thinking about storytelling and trying to capture emotion and put people on an emotional roller coaster when they're watching one of the films. I would say, to answer your question, a lot of it I think is on the business side. And I think there's not that there's zero effort, but I think there's oftentimes not as much time and attention put on the business side of things. And I understand, because it's, a lot of times it's not a sexy thing. And, when you start talking to someone about, hey, you might want to read this book on sales. You might want to read this book on marketing. You might need to invest or hire someone to help with sales and marketing. You might need to help with someone for follow-ups or lead capture or things like that. It's not as sexy as, actually filming a wedding or researching gear or looking up, the latest editing technique or downloading a new LUT or whatever these things are. So I would say, it's kind of a long way of saying, I think people who really want to be successful in this industry, they have to spend a great deal of time on the business side of things. And even if they don't know it, that's okay. But at least recognizing, do I even have a sales funnel? What is my sales funnel? How many leads do I get? What's my conversion rate? Am I even profitable on any of my jobs? What are my goals? My financial goals for the next 1, 2, 3 years. Because at the end of the day, again, unless you're independently wealthy, then maybe this doesn't matter. And if it's a hobby, also, it might not matter. But for a lot of people, and again, this doesn't necessarily mean if you're full-time or not, but I think if you're calling yourself a professional filmmaker, these aspects are incredibly important. And it's not to say that you have to do it all on your own. You can absolutely find amazing people on different platforms, Fiverr, Upwork, colleagues. There's tons and tons of places where you can leverage incredible resources that you can afford, but you absolutely cannot neglect the business side of things, because things won't just magically pan out for you. It's probably a very low probability that, by putting zero or very little attention to the business side, things are just going to magically end up fantastic for you.
Okay, I see. And how would you choose your niche in 2026? Will you go for wedding, corporate, real estate, or events?
And you're saying this if I was giving any input to a filmmaker, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this question. So, again, I think going back to some of the earlier discussions, the earlier chats, is really understanding, what are you trying to get out of being a filmmaker and why do you want to be a filmmaker? Because, if we're using divergent thinking, there's many ways that you can be successful as a filmmaker or, as a creative in that regard. And there are many different paths that you can choose, whether it's commercial filmmaking, whether it's event filmmaking, whether it's weddings specifically, whether it's specific types of weddings that, some folks want to be destination wedding filmmakers. Some people love filming dance recitals, theater performances. So we've seen from just anecdotally, from my experience and also working with, again, tens of thousands of event filmmakers over the last 16 plus years, we've seen kind of a number of different scenarios where people have been successful. And not to say these are the only ones, but so some people, all they do is weddings. 100%, all they do is weddings. And they kind of pick, going back to our earlier point, they kind of pick their niche. I'm doing high volume, I'm doing high end, I'm doing, middle of the road, but I'm going to do a reasonable volume. I'm going to bring on team members. I'm not going to do it all myself. So there's a number of ways there. Then we found people, and again, this also depends on where you live, right? And how much you're willing to travel. If you're willing to travel, you can film weddings all year round. There's, millions of weddings all over the world. So if you're willing to get on a plane and go anywhere, you can film weddings all year round. If you're not, and you only want to film in your local market, then a lot of times weather is going to dictate this. So a lot of times wedding season, depending where you live, obviously if you're closer to the equator, you can film almost year round. Some areas where it's colder, maybe only have 4 or 5 months. So a lot of times people will still do it and they'll kind of pack all of their weddings and they're able to make all their money in that short season. Other people, they diversify, and so they'll film weddings and they'll do something else. And the something else could be corporate work, real estate, product demos, local businesses that they're filming, things like this, doing dance recitals, theater performances. There's other people that just focus on dance or theater, and there's other people that just focus on commercial. So to answer your question directly, I think, one, you can be successful in all of these things. What actually brings you enjoyment? Because at the end of the day, look, if you're full-time, you're working on this 30, 40, 50 hours a week. So you can be successful in a lot of these different areas, different niches. So I think one is there something that really draws you in and something that you find exciting that you're excited about learning and doing? Some people just love weddings and their passion is there. And even after filming 200, 300, 400 weddings, they still love to learn and grow and tell stories and evolve their films. And, that's definitely one way to go. Some people really love more on the commercial side of things because each project can be unique. Maybe doing real estate videos, depending on the videos, those ones can be a little bit more similar, but a lot of times I've seen incredible creativity in there. People doing different drone shots, people filming different stages of the day, looking at, how does the sun cast light into the home early in the day, at sunrise, at sunset, during inclement weather and things like that. So I think there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's just really dependent on the individual and, where they really feel they can get excited. And the other cool part too is that none of these things are set in stone. So wherever you start, if you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to test out filming weddings, or I'm going to test out doing commercial work, I'm going to test out doing dance or theater, there's no immutable law of physics that says you have to continue that, into eternity. So you can test this out, and if you don't like it after 6 months, a year, you can start dabbling in other areas, and you can test these things out, and maybe you want to pivot in another direction. But I would say, having some level of intentionality at the get-go and, writing down and really meditating on why you want to go into a specific niche, I think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great feedback for anyone who really want to start that. And what skill really matters today that really didn't matter 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say there's a couple things. I think for sure, I think editing has become, being a really great editor, whether you're doing it or you're outsourcing it, but I think the quality of your edits, I think that's something that's evolved tremendously over the last 10 years. I would say 10 years ago, people were still doing a lot. They've kind of changed the format away from really, really long form format. But I would say consumers, if we look at it from a consumer standpoint, I think there's a couple things. One, I think the average consumer has become more sophisticated and has increased their expectations as far as what a final film looks like. I think especially with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and even there's tons of great content and really incredible editing programs and things that even just consumers can do. Like I have friends that aren't professional filmmakers that they'll create some really cool reels just using their phone, using a GoPro, using some of the editing software, some of the stuff that's automated, some of the AI software. So I think the average person watching videos, and especially when this comes to couples, they become more sophisticated and more knowledgeable about what does it mean to create a great film. They might not be able to articulate it, but I think they can sense it, where if things look a little off, if the color grading is a little bit off, if the storytelling isn't quite there. So I think it's something that's evolved quite dramatically. And so I think for folks really to, compete at that highest level, I think their films have to be amazing. But the cool part now is that they don't have to do it all by themselves. I know a lot of people think, I've heard different permutations of, I could never outsource my editing. No one can tell a story like I can, and I wouldn't feel authentic if I did. And it's total nonsense, because you can go look at a lot of stuff is public. Some of the best filmmakers in the world charging $20,000, $30,000 for a client are outsourcing all of their editing, 100% of their editing. Color grading, maybe they're doing a little small amount, but it's kind of one of these things of, you kind of have to check yourself that if you're thinking, hey, how could I possibly outsource? It's like, no, just go look at the actual examples. Now, if you love editing, that's cool. Maybe you want to hold on to that. And maybe it makes sense to hire someone who's better than you or can do it more effectively for some of the filming. So, I think a lot of this is really understanding, kind of what's most important to you, and really going after putting out these amazing films, but understanding you don't have to do it all by yourself. There's some great resources out there.
Perfect. And let me just reverse the question. What skill really don't matter today that used to be considered as essential?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say to a certain degree, I think trying to pick out maybe gear selection, if you will. So I think 10 years ago, there was still incredible gear. Don't get me wrong. If we go back, it's almost the end of 2025, so we go back to 2015. Back 10 years ago, there's still incredible gear, and especially when we're thinking about lens technology, a lot of the lenses are still very analog, so the technology hasn't changed a ton. But I think 10 years ago, I think there's an argument to be made where there was a certain amount of due diligence and research that you needed to do to have, really reliable, great equipment that would hold up under a lot of different conditions and really tell the story that you wanted to tell. I think if we fast forward now, I would argue people are probably overwhelmed or spoiled for choice from great equipment and stuff that people can afford, and if you even buy used equipment. So I would say that's one thing is just, and I know people will probably debate this, whether it's like, oh, Nikon is terrible, and Canon, oh, that's the worst, and Sony, and oh my, and they have their different reasons, and that's okay, that's fine. But I would say that's probably one thing that's probably not as applicable is, being kind of a gear expert and things like that, and especially with audio. There's some incredibly affordable. There's tons of YouTube channels of people just going over gear reviews of really incredible gear that's very, very affordable and accessible for folks. So I would say that's one part. And then I would say maybe to add to that, kind of still in the gear realm, but I think for actual computer hardware, your actual computer, your editing machine. So if we go back 10 years ago, and especially if you're already doing 4K, 10 years ago, there was a lot of machines, PCs and Macs, that really struggled to edit 4K, where when you were trying to do any type of rendering, that might take a really, really long time. So I would say as we fast forward now, especially on MacBooks, using their native chips, they're quite remarkable in how quickly and how effectively they can edit and handle 4K. And now, there's a lot of really good PCs. So I would say, kind of from a tech standpoint, a lot of the hardware has really improved quite considerably in the last 10 years, and especially as more and more people have done 4K. Obviously, we know these files are huge. So, yeah, I would say those are kind of a couple key areas.
I see. And let's talk about some of the pricing. So, how would you structure your pricing as a new wedding filmmaker? What are the things you will consider?
Yeah, I like this question. So, again, I think using, I don't want to keep harping on it, but I think trying to use divergent thinking, right? There's not just one way to be successful with your pricing. There are many ways, and there's probably models that, aren't even being used yet, that people are probably brainstorming or testing out that could be successful. So I would say the first part is understanding there's no one size fits all, and there's many ways to be successful with your pricing models. And if we go through kind of a couple examples, one, some people still do kind of the traditional where they have, one or more packages. And the package includes, a certain number of people actually filming on the day of the event, and they have, certain deliverables for what the clients are going to view. So, you guys are pretty familiar, but it might be a short highlight video, 30 seconds. There might be a video that's, 6 to 10 minutes. It's called the highlight, something like that. And maybe there's some longer form content, full ceremony, speeches, things like that. And so one model is having multiple packages, maybe a 3-tiered system or something like that. And maybe there's a few add-ons in there. I think that's one way. And we've seen a lot of people have success with this. The other way, another model that we've seen is where almost everything is a la carte. So there really isn't a package per se. It's more of a build your own package. And there's pros and cons for this strategy for sure. But that's one method that we've seen people deploy successfully, where essentially everything is a la carte. And so you're really allowing the couples to build a package around their wants, their needs, their budgets, things like that. And you're putting them more in the driver's seat as far as what do they actually want. Now, obviously, you can encourage them. I heard a great quote from some of the industry where they said, during the sales process or when you're talking with clients, you want to act more like a waiter than a salesperson. So you want to help guide them towards the best decision for them, and decision they really feel great about. So I really like that avenue. So those are kind of those are two methods. The third one is, it's kind of similar to the first, but you might have a couple core packages and then you have some add-ons. I'll say the other part of it is to distinguish that this is very important, that you don't have to sell everything during that first meeting or even when you sign the contract. So I think this is something that, I know this is kind of going a little bit beyond the scope of the question, but I think it's really important. As far as your business model, the ability to provide value, create value, and to, you could call it sell more of your services, doesn't stop and shouldn't stop just on that initial meeting. I know so many filmmakers we talk to, they kind of view it as this very hard line in the sand whereby I have the client in front of me and whatever I can sell to them, whatever value I can communicate with them in that moment, that's my only chance to basically provide value and whatever amount of revenue I'm going to make for this project, and that's it. And I can't ask them afterwards. I can't ask them an hour later, a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, which is absolute nonsense. There's no written rule. There's no law that says you can't continue to provide value and ask. And where we've seen a lot of this kind of ties into the business model where, if you look back, a lot of people that are really successful in the industry, they may make 50%, 100% more leading up to the wedding, after the wedding, a month after the wedding, a year after the wedding. And there's a variety of ways to actually execute on this. But if you want to consider that part of the business model, I would say that's part of it too, where maybe it's a la carte, maybe it's package, but also timing. The timing doesn't need to be definitive or stuck just in that initial client meeting or when they're booking or putting their deposit down. So I'd say that's something really important for folks to consider.
Yeah. And oftentimes we see that the new filmmakers didn't do any upsell or anything. So what's your recommendation? What service you will put in the main package and what you will recommend to put in the upsell?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a couple ways you could tackle it. What we've seen with folks being successful, they've done it in a couple different ways. One, in their base package, they'll put in at least kind of the minimum they think that it's going to take to create a successful film, and also for them to, make a profit and feel happy about the gig. Because I think that part's super important. I know I've seen some folks where they're trying to, compete on price instead of on value, and the problem with this is that a lot of times they're attracting the wrong customers, and they're attracting people who are price shoppers, and they're just going to go with the lowest bid. They don't really care about quality. And if their cousin's willing to do it for $500 on an iPhone, they might actually lose that gig. So I think you have to be very careful on pricing it seems counterintuitive, but pricing your options too low and your packages too low. Because there's no guarantee. Obviously, I think there's a high probability, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to upsell or that your clients are going to purchase additional items. So I think your initial package should be robust enough. Another pricing strategy, I know having said that, some people they'll purposely put in a package that's terrible to make their next package look great. So that is a strategy. This is something that's been around for a while, is that the core package, maybe it's $1,000 or something like that, or $1,500 or something like that, but it's absolutely terrible in comparison relative to maybe their next package up. So that's one option that they can do as well. And then I would say, you asked about, okay, well, how can they be, more successful with upsells and things like that? I think, we could make a 10-hour video on selling, but I think some of the core concepts are, one, understanding what are your clients' values? What do they value? What is important to them? Where are they at in their buying journey? Can you understand their budget and their needs and help align with what you're offering to what their values are and what their actual needs and wants are? I think that's super important, because any of us can try to do a hard sell and push something on our clients, and maybe you'll land some sales and maybe you won't. But I think if you can have really good alignment with what they need, there's definitely an opportunity for upsells. Specifically, I would say 4K can be upsell. I know some folks do it as default and some folks do it as an upsell, and I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think you should test it out, understand your clients, understand your market. I think that's one opportunity. I think for sure drones. Some people include it. Some people do as an add-on. But we always encourage people, what is the marginal cost or marginal effort, even if the couple doesn't purchase the drone, to bring your drone, get some beautiful shots, and essentially create more opportunities. So to answer your question about upsells, again, the upsell doesn't have to take place necessarily just at that initial meeting. The fact that you're capturing all of this incredible content, a lot of that can be an opportunity to sell content later. And I would say thirdly, I know it sounds really trivial, but ask for the upsell. Like, even if the client says, hey, yeah, I'm going to go with package 2, great. You could let them know, hey, that's a great decision. That's a really smart decision. Hey, have you considered? Would you be opposed to? Have you ever thought about? Do you think this would provide value? Do you think your grandparents? Do you think your parents might like this? Again, like I said, a sales video could be, a 10-hour video that we do together. But I think just some core ideas are, one, asking for it. 2, at least having the options in there. So even just having them listed out on your website or when you present it to your clients. And then 3, ideally trying to align what are the goals of your clients? What are they trying to, what is most important for them for their wedding film? And do you have options that align with that? So I would say, yeah, those are kind of a couple ideas.
Okay. And even after doing all of these, we often see that filmmakers have to quit from their business in 1 or 2 years just because they didn't have enough knowledge how to really calculate the pricing and how to really figure out the true cost of every project. So how do you think a filmmaker should calculate their true cost per project?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say there's a couple ways that you can solve this. I've seen, I've been to a few industry events and seminars and talked to a lot of filmmakers to see how they do it. So I've seen a few ways that people tackle it. One, they calculate an hourly rate. So essentially they're valuing their time. They're saying, what is my time worth? But truly looking at total time investment. So they're not just calculating how much time did I spend at the wedding, because that's nonsense. That's a fraction of what you're actually spending on the actual project. There's prep time, there's editing time. They're probably going to take you 5 times as long as what you budgeted. There's a lot of overhead for just running your business. There's maintenance of gear. There's charging batteries. There's downloading your external cards from your cameras. Things. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. So I've seen one way where people basically look at their time investment. So there's calculators out there, and there's some really good Google Sheets or Excel sheets that folks have created. But the simple math is they look at what was my gross. Let's say we're evaluating. Let's say we're having this conversation in January 2026. So in 2025, you would look at what's the gross revenue minus everything that I spent, including gear. You can't exclude gear. I know people love to exclude gear, and I'm going to get 5 years out of it. Yeah, maybe, but you put up the cash now. So subtract out everything you spend on your business that came out of your pocket towards the business, including, car expenses, your cell phone, if you had any increase in your utilities at home, if you work from home, you have an office, and then, looking at how much gear did you buy too, because you can't just exclude that and say, I purchased an asset. Looking at essentially your net profit, and then dividing that by how many hours did you put into the business total, not just here and there, but actually try to be methodical about it, and then kind of look at your hourly rate is. And I know people have done this calculation before, and sometimes it's shocking. Sometimes people are making, I know it sounds crazy, at least in the U.S., like $5 an hour. They're getting paid less than minimum wage. And when you're starting off, I don't want to discourage people. When you're starting off, the hourly rate shouldn't matter as much. As long as you're progressing forward, you're making progress, and you have, again, going back to the original question is, what is your reason for becoming a filmmaker? Are you making more progress today than you were yesterday towards that goal? And even if you're not making a ton of profit, that's okay. As long as you're continuing to progress forward and you're getting more experience and your films are improving and your skills are improving and you're investing in yourself, those are all positive things. So, but I would argue after 2 or 3 years, if you're still making, and this is, in the US, you could put this for Europe as well, but if you're making the equivalent of $5 an hour, you have to really, you shouldn't beat yourself up, but you should really analyze, okay, well, what isn't working? Am I not charging enough for my films? Are my prices too low? Do I not have enough volume of films? Is my prices correct, but I don't have enough volume? Are my expenses just way too high? Are my expenses out of whack that I'm actually charging a good amount and I have a good volume, but there's a leak in the bucket. I'm blowing all my money. I'm buying $20,000 a year worth of gear, and maybe I'm buying it over the course of the year, and I kind of get bled out little by little. I'm not all seeing it at once. So I think that's one metric to look at. Another, I would say, for people can analyze is maybe it could be on kind of a per project basis. So I know some folks have done that where they just say, as long as I have X amount of profitability per project, I'm doing 20, 30, 40 projects a year, then it makes it worthwhile and I can continue growing and learning and getting better clients. And a third metric, if you will, it's kind of an aggregation of these two, but they're just looking at, kind of what's my net profit at the end of the year. And you could look at this as, again, kind of an opportunity cost. So, I'm a filmmaker, I'm full-time or I'm part-time, I'm putting X amount of hours in, I'm dedicating X amount of my life. not that everything boils down to money and kind of a spreadsheet and things like that, but what is that opportunity cost? And especially, let's move beyond. I liked your question of, maybe beyond year 1 and year 2. So when you're beyond those periods, what are you looking at, and what's your trajectory? That's another thing too. So you might be at, let's say after year 2, maybe you netted $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. Some people might say, oh my God, that's nothing. Some people might say, hey, that's great. I'd love to be there. But where's your trajectory? Where were you at last year? Where were you at 1 year? Where do you see the next year? So I think if you're continuing to progress, then I think that's awesome, and you can keep on that trajectory. But if you're after 2 or 3 years and this is a full-time gig and you're making 10 grand, again, this excludes if you're independently wealthy, or if you have money coming from other sources, or this is truly a part-time or a hobby. But if this is a full-time gig, I would say, one, don't throw in the towel yet. Really try to do a deep dive and understand what's not working, and talk to other people in the industry. Talk to some of your peers. You'd be amazed on how much advice that people are willing to give and help out in the industry. And not everyone just sees everyone as competition. So, yeah, I would say those are a couple key things that people can consider.
Perfect. And I hope it will definitely help all the new filmmakers that will come to this industry and try to really nail it down. Michael, thank you very much for joining this call, and hope to see you online in any other video.
Thanks, Em. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.